Season 3 of Ted Lasso has reached the final sprint and we've only got a handful of episodes left. With there being a main focus on Nate in this season as he went off to become the manager of West Ham, betraying AFC Richmond in the process, we spent the first few episodes of the season seeing the divide that was formed within his mind and the darker side to the character. However, as the season has developed, we've seen that Nate has started a journey of reconciling and returning to the type of person that he once was. But he's not done it just yet. So with that, I thought I'd break down and explain the exact moment when Nate realized that he was wrong and started the process of turning good again. So let's get into it. Here is the Ted Lasso moment when Nate turned good again. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Nate has had quite an interesting journey throughout this season of the show. We saw him start the season as the main villain, but we've gradually seen the main villain and antagonist of the show be what's actually occurring inside of Ted's mind. All of the feelings of conflict that he has about caring about his son Henry and wanting to be with him, but also his want to stay as manager of AFC Richmond and celebrate success with the club. Nate was originally being the type of person that Rupert was molding him into. He adopted the harshness, bluntness and rudeness that Rupert exhibits, and we saw that it wasn't the type of person that Nate truly wanted to be. The world that he was in was completely alien to him. Nate was in a world of flashy cars, models and attitudes that he wasn't quite used to. So much so that we saw several visual representations of this, such as when his car was towed away in the West Ham car park, his flashy car outside of his modest apartment, and his date with model Anastasia going to an extremely average restaurant, but a restaurant that mattered to him. The worst we saw Nate behaving was in the first episode where we saw him slander Ted during the press conference and also the club that showed him such loyalty in the past. So much so that the press ultimately made him out to be the villain in the rivalry that was present between both clubs. Something which he himself wasn't comfortable with, and neither was his family. However, that wasn't enough for him to realize that he needed to change. At this point, he was still very much under Rupert's grasp and being molded into the person that he wanted him to be. It was only later on down the line where we saw Nate make the decision in his mind that he needed to be better. So when was the moment when Nate changed? There was a period of absence from Nate in the early part of season 3, from the second episode to the start of the fourth, and it was within the fourth episode where we saw that Nate changed from the person that he was at the start. We got two polar opposite mindsets from Nate in one specific moment. It was when he was working on the tactician's board on the table and he knocked the model of Ted onto the floor. We saw him smile, smirk, and say, "Whoops," as if to say that he had one up on him and was laughing that he was on the floor. But then we saw a moment of reflection in his mind, and he instead put him on the table and he said, "There you go," which was the first sense of care and compassion out of the character in the entire season. This was something that hadn't been transferred across to his mind when around others though, and was almost like the turning point for the character. It was as the episode developed where we saw Nate want to try and repair his relationship with Ted. There was the moment in the elevator where Nate was turned with his back to Ted because he wanted to avoid being near him as he felt embarrassed over what happened in the past. And he didn't want to be reminded of how awkward the situation was when he left, along with everything that came out in the press. It was as the scene unfolded that we saw Nate look as though he wanted to apologize to him. It was only the presence of Rupert outside of the elevator that prevented that from happening. It interrupted Nate mid-sentence as he was on the verge of opening up, and instead we saw Nate almost scurry away, allowing us to see the hold that Rupert had over him and the inferior nature that he adopted when he was around Rupert. There was another moment that happened later on in that exact episode where we saw a complete contrast to the way that the character had been in the season 2 finale and also the earlier parts of season 3. Without realizing, he ignored Ted's handshake after the game and was only informed that he did this by the press. So he went to go and see Ted, but then it was too late to apologize to him. It was here where we had a lingering shot of Nate looking over at Ted where it almost had the same look as what he had at the start of the episode, where he put the model version of Ted back onto the board. A look of regret, apology, and care. But yet again, we saw that he was interrupted, but instead of it being Rupert, it was by Rupert's assistant, thus showing us that the moment that Nate has a sense of his old self becoming present, Rupert is always still able to get in the way and ensure that he'd be the person that he wanted him to be. Even when we look at the most recent episode, episode 8, where we saw that Ted went to watch the West Ham game, Nate was happy that Ted was there, and even once Rupert said to him that he'd prevent Ted from ever attending again, Nate didn't have it within him to stand up to him, despite it not being a problem. So there's definitely a complex that's going on within Nate's mind. That paired with the contrasting smile when he was looking at the article later on in the episode when he was reading the article about Ted being at the game, it most definitely shows us that within, Nate has returned to the person that he was before. The final confirming factor where we saw Nate go past the point of no return was when we saw him at the party that he was invited to after the game, and he witnessed Rupert being intimate with his assistant. This was a moment that confirmed to him that he was under the wing of the wrong person. He saw that being guided by Ted, somebody who did truly care for him, was so different to everything that he was experiencing and had experienced whilst working at West Ham and with Rupert. This rounded off the moment of reflection and regret with Nate and the realization that he's actually the person that has been in the wrong this whole time. Nate is not the person that we saw in the Season 2 finale and all throughout the first episode of Season 3, and we've seen that ever since Episode 4 of the show, he started working on himself and being a better version of himself, a version that Rupert would most likely be opposed to. For me, the moment when Nate realized that there was something wrong and he started his pathway back to being good was the moment that he accidentally knocked Ted off of the tactician board and he put him back on there. I believe we're going to see Nate and Ted reconcile in person and they'll finally repair their relationship that's been in question for the entirety of the season. I also feel like with that, we'll see Nate leave West Ham and him coming to the realization that the job that he always thought that he wanted is something that he doesn't actually want, if it means that he changes as a person. With him being with Jade and getting closer to his family again, I believe they will be the individuals that will ultimately ground him and make him realize that he needs to and wants to change. And the final piece in that puzzle will be him connecting with Ted again. It's a moment that I'm looking forward to seeing unfold, and I'm glad that we've started to see the character realize that he needs to change. He needs to change in order to be the best version of himself and bring the happiness back to his life. So, there you have it, the Ted Lasso moment when Nate turned good again. If you want to see more videos such as endings explained, theories and predictions and character breakdowns, then click on the I button, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. I've been covering the entirety of Season 3 of Ted Lasso over on the channel, from endings explained to theories and predictions on what we can expect next. So if you want to see more on Ted Lasso, then head over there. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. Do you think Nate is going to change? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.